Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova. The year was 2005. My former congregation and community in New York entered its second year of service learning work we had initiated in the outskirts of Managua, Nicaragua, the capital city of the country. Word had gotten out to a group of, let's call them self-appointed leaders in the Nicaraguan Jewish community, that a synagogue from the United States and their rabbi were coming down to support the people of Nicaragua through house building. Back then, I hadn't even envisioned a community, a Jewish community, ever existing in Nicaragua. Never even crossed my mind. Perhaps the word community is a bit generous. A fractious conglomerate of Jews by name and practice who each believed that their way was the way to do Jewish. You don't know anything about that, right? No. Over the years, the community experienced various stages of growth and decline, often in response to the contours of political rule and subsequent acceptance of Jewish identity and practice. Hence, the ebb and flow of the community's historical journey contributed greatly to its current disparate reality. Their initial outreach to me led to many shared experiences over many years, deepening our understanding and relationship with their community. Through each visit, I was constantly struck by how many of them had chosen to establish roots in the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, I found this splintered community surprisingly unanimous in their longing for their country to reestablish its diplomatic ties with the State of Israel. I had come to observe that regardless of their respective level of practice or observance, each community member had an inherent understanding that their fate was inextricably linked to the Jewish homeland. One community outside of Israel connected with an invisible string of practice, peoplehood, and historical pedigree. I recall being curious at this time about their strong connection, and I asked their leadership what they believed united their community with Israel, given their geographic and their cultural divides. I'm actually not sure any of them offered a substantive response, or at least a memorable one. Yet after all these years, I realized that both their longing and ambiguity with that question mirrors much of what we, as Jews in the diaspora, face today. As someone of my generation, I grew up at a time believing peace was possible between Israel and the Palestinian people, where pride in a Jewish state was something that my parents and grandparents exhibited proudly. I understood that for me, the term Zionism meant the following: an acknowledgement that nearly the entire global Jewish community supports the right to and the need for Jewish national self-determination in part of our ancestral homeland. That definition holds true for me even today. Subsequent years of travel, visiting family, studying, living through an intifada, and countless short-term adventures in Israel for myself and leading others have woven an incredible tapestry of powerful and nuanced experiences. And each experience has led to more questions and more curiosity. Our tradition has derived insight from our insatiable propensity towards curiosity and questioning. From Abraham's willingness to question and negotiate with God for the sake of righteousness, to the inquisitive debates within the Talmud, curiosity has always been a driving force in our faith and in our identity. We are encouraged to question, to seek understanding, and to uncover the deeper meanings behind our actions. After all, that's the essence of our time here over these days of awe, to reignite our curiosity with self and with other. In the spring, the Jewish Telegraph Agency, the JTA, published an article on how American rabbis wrestle with different approaches to discussing Israel from the pulpit. In that article, my colleague in LA, Rabbi Sharon Brous, noted the phenomenon even has an informal name called Death by Israel Sermon. All this to say, I ask for your grace this morning as I share some reflections with you on this very topic. Over the past few months, your rabbis have voiced individual and collective concern over Israel's current state of affairs as it presents today. A seismic rightward shift in the Israeli government, positions of ministerial power occupied by dark forces whose values stand in opposition to a host of values that we hold dear: LGBTQ rights, judicial autonomy, religious pluralism, the Palestinian aspiration for self-determination, diaspora-Israel relations, and democracy as a whole. On this Rosh Hashanah morning, I want to approach Israel's current state of affairs with curiosity, yours and mine. I want you to question and wrestle. I want each of us to lean into our own inquisitiveness so that in whatever age and stage of life we find ourselves, and within whatever philosophical pedigree we ascribe, we can ask with heartfelt authenticity, why should we care about what's happening in Israel today? To advance our wrestling, I want to start with some basic foundations. In the Talmud or rabbinic teachings, in discussing the potential effects of sin, the rabbis conclude this section with an Aramaic phrase, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh. Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, meaning all of Israel are responsible for one another. Simplistic in its presentation, this phrase is the basic of the notion of communal responsibility according to halakha or Jewish law. Many of you may be familiar with the verse. I recall this rallying cry when accompanying my grandfather in the 1980s to Washington, D.C. in support of Soviet Jewry. We also hear it used today when we encounter another Jew falling victim to anti-Semitic rhetoric or attacks. Yet, the rabbis understood the phrase a bit differently. They note that if one Jew sees another Jew on the verge of sinning, they have an obligation to step in and to help. From Arev, from the Talmud, Jews must be Arevim, guarantors for one another. In other words, all Jews are mixed up with one another. And the guarantor, us, becomes one who is obligated when one faults on their obligation. I am aware that there are those here in this sanctuary, watching us online, and as part of our community, who do not support or perhaps feel a need for Israel to be a thread woven into the fabric of your personal Jewish identity. In fact, in speaking with a few younger people from our community, for them, attachment to Israel is complex and tenuous, and some have a tough time even perceiving the Jewish state as a place they could ever call home. I want to say to you, I see you and I hear you. Your voice and your passion are part of the conversation. Truth be told, you don't have to be of a younger generation to be distressed by what's happening. So you might be asking, so Rabbi, get on with it. What's actually happening? Today I'm inviting and allowing us to see ourselves as mixed up Arevim, as guarantors who lean in with curiosity. And let me share with you why. The Knesset, Israel's parliament, has passed the first part of a planned overhaul of the country's judiciary system. What does this new legislation do, and why is it so controversial? The Knesset passed legislation abolishing the reasonableness doctrine, which the Supreme Court of Israel has employed to evaluate government policies. It's a practice used by high courts in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, among other countries. The doctrine operates exactly as it sounds. The court determines whether a given government policy is sensible and sound. For critics, it means the potential weakening of the judicial system in favor of the government and the Knesset. Since Israel has a parliamentary system, proposed reforms such as weakening judicial oversight and appointment of judges would undermine the balance of power between Israel's branches of government. For proponents, they're making the case that the judiciary has become an unaccountable branch of government of the Knesset that has usurped the government in setting policy. It's important to note as I give this sermon that the Knesset's decision is currently being appealed in that very body, in the High Court. Within Israeli society, the divisiveness over these reforms reflects a critical point for us to all be aware of. Israelis have moved beyond the debate of the merits of technical judiciary changes and are now contending over a range of difficult issues, including the role of religion in Israeli society, national identity, and the defining qualities of Israel's polity. All of these are intertwined with debates about Israel's Jewish and democratic character. It has spurred a high-stakes national conversation of what it means to be Israeli 75 years after its founding. So understanding what's at stake, I went back to the modern state of Israel's beginnings and tried to recognize that its founding tensions have actually never been fully resolved. A Jewish state was born just 3 years after the Holocaust. Desperate times when the future of the remnants of our people was weighed in the balance. In the years after, the country brought in millions of persecuted Jews from every corner of the world, absorbed them with difficulty and unevenness, all the while successfully defending itself from daily existential threats. I can only imagine that the daily demands of survival took precedence over articulating and legislating fundamental constitutional principles. Over the past 8 decades, we have witnessed some of those founding tensions in practice. A nation built on the PTSD of powerlessness experienced in the diaspora, contrasted with the moral exercise of its collective current powers. The transitional challenges from being an oppressed minority into a just and democratic majority, it's deep and it's real. Yet, through curiosity and through struggle, Israelis have chosen to take on the complexities of self-governance and the moral challenges of exercising power, as opposed to being subject to powerlessness at the mercy of varied oppressors that plagued our people throughout Jewish civilization. We have seen hundreds of thousands of Israelis take to the streets each week for months now in protest of plans by the current government to overhaul the judicial system. The list of protesters includes a wide spectrum of Israeli society, showing us that democracy is currently alive and well there, and they want it to remain as such. Those from the economic, business, and academic sectors to CEOs and military leaders, longtime friends of Israel, constitutional scholars, and many rabbis, including those leading Orthodox communities. This Jewish value of kinship and responsibility is at the very core of the heightened struggle that many of us are feeling today when it comes to our relationship with Israel. How much are we willing to be mixed up and hold responsibility for a symbolic and literal family that is nearly 8,000 miles away? As modern guarantors in the diaspora, what is our role? In this new moment of upheaval and what feels like threat, an opportunity has awakened for us to face and address the foundational principles of Israeli society far more deliberately than we have in the past. While Israeli citizens must determine their principles as they move forward, world Jewry has a critical role to play in influencing the character of the Jewish state, a role it has had well before the first hour of Jewish statehood. My colleague, Rabbi Amiel Hirsch, an outspoken and ardent Zionist, recently penned an article on his painful misgivings with the current Israeli government, where he noted, "What transpires in Israel directly affects the future of the American Jewish community. If there is anyone who thinks that we can go on our merry way, turning our backs on Israel and live in splendid American isolation, never having to think of all the messiness of Jewish statehood, you are deluded." The nature, the character, and well-being of Israel will in large part determine the future of American Jewry, he notes. My deep curiosity around Israel's foundational tensions and its current political and ideological unrest have led me to some important clarity that it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to sustaining the greatest achievement of the Jewish people throughout our civilization. Just as our sages debated and discussed, we too can engage in conversations and in actions focused on the ways that we can contribute to the well-being of the land and its inhabitants, and how Israel can remain a place of refuge and a well from which we can draw culture and pride. As guarantors, I'm offering 4 approaches, and here they are. Number 1, we must acknowledge our capacity to offer objections and support at the same time. Founding Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, after the outbreak of war in 1939, as the British issued the infamous White Paper, restricting Jewish immigration to pre-Palestine, said the following: "We will fight the White Paper as if there is no war, and we will fight the war as if there is no White Paper." We can support Israel even as we harbor our objections to its current government, and defend Israel against its existential threats even as we take issue with its actions that we believe run counter to its long-term interests. Critiquing decision makers is a sign of health and vitality in the Jewish community. It is part of our DNA. Number 2, now is the time to step up. Not tomorrow, today. There are various ways to engage in the region that can amplify your own voice and support worthwhile organizations that are working to build bridges between Israel, the diaspora, and Palestinian communities. Encounter introduces Jewish leaders to the lived experience of Palestinians. Zionist fights for social, racial, economic, and gender equality in America, and for the inclusion of Zionists in social justice spaces. Roots works at the grassroots level to foster understanding and nonviolence. Israel Policy Forum is dedicated to advancing a 2-state solution in order to preserve Israel's future, and the critical work of the Israeli Reform Movement establishes pluralistic Jewish communities while advocating for religious pluralism throughout the country. Number 3, pragmatic resilience. Attend events and conferences that promote dialogue and understanding. Speak out in support of our Jewish ancestral homeland when encountering injustice, discrimination, and mistruth. Make personal connections with Israelis, whether through travel or social media. Engage with leaders and institutions to better understand the challenges and opportunities they face today, and get curious and voice concern without demonization. Such activism has the power and the capacity to change hearts and minds. You can even get a jump start. This Monday, September 18th, the Murray Gallinson San Diego Initiative will host a forum on Israel's future democratic identity, led by Dr. Amos Nadan, and you can find more information about it on our website. Number 4, get curious about the many faces of Israel, a tapestry woven from diverse threads of history, culture, and beliefs. Just as our own community embraces a range of backgrounds, so does Israel. Learn about the various communities that comprise the nation state: Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze, and more. religious and secular in their respective identities, each contribute their unique colors to the vibrant mosaic of Israeli society. By seeking to understand the aspirations and challenges of all its inhabitants, we can better tailor our individual support that we feel comfortable with to uplift the notion that a rising tide lifts all boats. In other words, improvement or progress in these various communities has the potential to benefit many throughout Israeli society. The late political economist Albert Hirschman wrote the book Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. In it, he explains that when one sees a business, nation, or any human group in crisis, there is no choice to be made. There is a choice to be made. One can either walk away or one can have a voice, attempt to repair or change that relationship through grievance, engagement, or activism. There are those who would say that to criticize Israel is a sign of disloyalty. I believe otherwise. If hundreds of thousands of Israelis can express their love and concern for Israel by protesting its government, so can I. No different than my activism as an American in favor of righting the injustices in this country is an expression of my patriotism, so too my Zionism. Over the past 150 plus individuals from our community opted into the conversation by joining us in Israel, and 60 plus are already committed to doing so this coming June. So as we embrace 5784, I'm asking you, are you going to walk away, or are you going to use your voice? Leverage your conscience and moral compass to influence change, to fight for your values, and to help Israel realize the fullness of its founding vision. In other words, don't opt out, awaken, and lean into what may be possible. We can, as have diaspora communities from the very beginning, negotiate our relationship with Israel, keeping strong this invisible string, a common faith and a common history with all of our differences. So as I close, I invite you for a moment to meditate on these words, recently written by Israeli Rabbi Oded Mazor from congregation called Neshama in Jerusalem. And he entitles it, Home. We came to shout, and when you asked what's up, I said, if we're here, that's good. We shout because it hurts, because something should hurt, because I have a heart to feel, because I have a voice, because we came together and someone's listening. This is our home and we're worried about it, worried together. And behind our worry hides gratitude, because generations didn't have it, home. It's our responsibility. We have a shared home, and behind the disagreements hides great love. So great that sometimes it makes it hard to see the love that he also has for the home, and that she wants, like me, that this will be our shared home. But how should we behave at home, and what's shared? This is what hurts. And behind the pain hides beauty. Beauty really miraculous but human. Not the most beautiful, but the most beautiful here, at home. Just as we approach the divine with wonder and curiosity in the new year, may we be ever mindful that this sacred place in which we dwell together, our home, our Beth Israel home, is not only a house of prayer, but the home that helps us identify, explore, and wrestle with our Jewish values. The home that inspires a realization that those values can guide our curiosity toward a future where our actions reflect the very best of and within us. Help me, help us as guarantors, as Arevim, strengthen our homes both here and in Israel by continuing the conversation as we get curious and lean in together. Amen.